The 33 sermons on Nibbāna were delivered by the Venerable Bhikkhu Kaṭukurunde Ñāṇananda in Sinhala at Mitrigala Nissaranavanaya Forest Hermitage. They were translated into English by the same Venerable monk, presently residing at Potkulkala Forest Hermitage in Kandagedara Devalagam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Etang santang, etang panitang, yadidang sabba sankhara samatho, sabbo padhipati saggo, tanhakyo, virago, nirodho, nibbāna. This is peaceful, this is excellent, namely the stilling of all preparations, the relinquishment of all assets, the destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, extinction. With the permission of the most venerable great preceptor and the assembly of the venerable meditating monks, this is the 25th sermon in the series of sermons on Nibbāna. The other day we made an attempt to understand, in the light of the Kalakarama Sutta, the enlightened attitude of the Tathagata, who has realized the cessation of the 6 bases of sense contact towards the viewpoints of the worldlings, who find themselves confined within those 6 bases. In that discourse, the Buddha declared with the words, Tamahang Ñāṇananda, all that I do know. The fact that he has understood all what the world with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, and the progeny consisting of recluses and Brahmins, gods and men, have seen, heard, sensed, cognized, thought after, and pondered over by the mind. By his next assertion, Tamahang Abhanyasin, the Buddha proclaimed that he not only knows all that, but knows it thoroughly in some special way. With the words Tang Tathagatassa Viditang, he declares that by virtue of this special knowledge, he has understood all what the world claims to know. Despite this special knowledge and understanding, the Tathagata takes no stance and has no inclination or partiality towards those sensory data, as is evident from the expression Tang Tathagato na upaṭṭhāsi. Worldlings in general are in the habit of asserting dogmatically, I know, I see, it is verily so, Ñāṇāmi passāmi tatheva etang, when they have a special knowledge or understanding of something or other. But according to this discourse, it seems that the Buddha takes no stance and has no inclination or partiality towards those sensory data, precisely because he has a special knowledge and understanding with regard to them. This fact is highlighted by the concluding summary verses, particularly by the lines Ñāṇāmi passāmi tatheva etang ajjositam nati tathāgatānam. I know, I see, it is verily so. No such clinging for the Tathagatas. In order to explain this strange difference of attitude, we quoted the other day 2 significant terms from the Mūlapariyaya Sutta of the Majjhima Nikāya, namely Saññānāti and Abhiñānāti. They represent 2 levels of knowledge in the context of that particular discourse. Saññānāti stands for perceptual knowledge, whereas Abhiñānāti conveys the idea of some special understanding of a higher order. The level of knowledge implied by the term Saññānāti is that which characterizes the ordinary worldling's worldview. He is deluded by the mirage-like perception in his view of the world, and goes on imagining, Maññana, a real world enslaved to the patterns of the grammatical structure. But the Tathagata has penetrated into the true nature of those seen, heard, sensed, and the like, with his extraordinary level of higher knowledge, abhiññā, yielding full comprehension. Therefore, he does not take his stand upon any of them. He has no stance to justify the usage of the term upaṭṭhāsi, since he does not entertain imaginings, maññana. What is called maññana is the imagining in egoistic terms, imparting reality to illusory things. It is this principle of refraining from vain imaginings that is indicated by the term na upaṭṭhāsi, does not take a stand upon. Tathagatas have no clinging or entanglement, ajjositam, precisely because they entertain no imaginings. In regard to things seen, heard, etc., the Tathagatas have no clinging, binding, or entanglement by way of craving, conceit, and views respectively. We happened to mention the other day that those peculiar declarations with which the Kālakārāma Sutta opens bear some resemblance to the tetralemma discussed in our treatment of the undetermined points. The set of 4 alternative propositions concerning the Tathagata's after-death state may be cited as a paradigm for the tetralemma. 1. Hoti Tathagato Param Marana. The Tathagata exists after death. 2. Nahoti Tathagato Param Marana. The Tathagata does not exist after death. 3. Hoti cha nacha hoti Tathagato Param Marana. The Tathagata both exists and does not exist after death. 4. Neva hoti na hoti Tathagato Param Marana. The Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist after death. The declarations found in this discourse bear some affinity to the above-mentioned tetralemma. However, we find here the Buddha making the first declaration in several stages. Firstly, he makes the statement that whatever is seen, heard, sensed and cognized, thought after and pondered over by all beings in the world, that he knows. In the second statement, he affirms that he has a higher knowledge of all that. Then comes a sentence which reaffirms that the Tathagata has understood, but ends with the statement that the Tathagata does not take his stand upon it. Generally, when confronted with the tetralemma, the Buddha summarily dismisses all the 4 alternative propositions. But here the peculiarity is in not dismissing the first proposition at once. He declares that he knows, that he has higher knowledge, and that he has understood all that. Apparently he is affirming the first proposition, granting the validity of sensory data. But then comes the concluding statement to the effect that he does not take a stand upon them, no upaṭṭhāsi, which amounts to a negation. The secret behind this peculiar presentation will emerge when we bring up the proper similes and parables. Till then, what can be gleaned from the context is that the Tathagata has no stance, not because he is ignorant, but due to the very fact that he knows full well and has understood the nature of the sum total of sensory data. The worldlings are prone to think that it is when convincing knowledge is lacking that one has no such stance. But the Buddha declares here that he takes no stance in regard to what is seen, heard, sensed, etc., precisely because he has a special understanding, a penetrative knowledge of the essencelessness of the data obtained through the 6 sense bases. So it seems in this context too, we have the negation of the first alternative, as is usual in the case of a tetralemma, only that the negation is expressed here in a very peculiar way. Let us now take up the second declaration. Yang bhikkave sadeva kassa lokassa samarakassa sabbrahmakassa sassamana brahmaniya pajaya sadeva manussaya ditthaṃ sutaṃ mutaṃ viññātaṃ pattaṃ pariyesitaṃ anuvicaritang manasa tamahang na jānāmiti vadeyaṃ taṃ mamasa musa. If I were to say, monks, whatsoever in the world with its gods, maras and brahmas, among the progeny consisting of recluses and brahmins, gods and men, whatsoever is seen, heard, sensed and cognized, thought after and pondered over by the mind, all that I do not know, it would be a falsehood in me. There is a difference of opinion as to the correct reading of this second declaration. Deep suttas often present difficulties in determining the exact reading, and this is especially the case with the Kālakārāma Sutta. In this instance, the commentary has followed the reading, Tamaham Jnanamiti Vadeyaṃ Tammamassa Musa. If I were to say that I know, it would be a falsehood in me. But as we have pointed out earlier, this reading is not meaningful. That is probably why the Chatta Sangiti Pitaka edition has followed the variant reading, Tamaham Najanamiti Vadeyaṃ, if I were to say that I do not know. This departure from the commentary tradition seems justifiable, since the Buddha has already declared that he knows all that. It stands to reason, therefore, that in the second declaration he makes it clear that to say, I do not know, would be a contradiction, a falsehood. But why this clarification? Generally, the worldlings expect one to unequivocally assert and take one's stand upon one's viewpoint in categorical terms, as expressed by the dictum, idameva satyam mogamanya. This alone is true, all else is false. Failure to do so is recognized as a lack of knowledge or precision. The second declaration is meant to forestall such an objection. Since the first declaration ends with the clause, tam tathagato na upaṭṭhāsi, but the Tathagata has not taken his stand upon it. So it amounts to a statement like, it is not because I do not know that I take no stance. In the same strain, we can explain the declarations that follow. It seems then that the second declaration, tamahang Ñāṇananda vadeyam sammamassa musa, if I were to say all that I do not know, it would be a falsehood in me, amounts to the second alternative of the tetralegon. The next declaration follows the same trend. To quote the relevant portion, tamahang jānāmi-ca na-ca jānāmi-ti vadeyam sampassatādisami. If I were to say I both know it and do not know it, that too would be a falsehood in me. In regard to the aforesaid scenes, heard, sensed, etc., if I were to say that I know, I do not know, or even a combination of both those statements, as I both know and do not know, it would be a falsehood on my part. Why? Because the world is accustomed to put down such a vacillation to a lack of certitude. To say I both know it and know it not looks like a confession of partial knowledge, since it can mean knowledge and ignorance going 50-50. So the Buddha says in this instance too that it would likewise be a falsehood. Tam passatādisami. Now we come to the fourth statement. The Buddha declares, if I were to say I neither know it nor am ignorant of it, would be a fault in me. Tamahang neva jānāmi na jānāmi ti vadeyam tam mama assakali. We can understand that position too. Generally, the worldlings think that a refusal to make a categorical statement is either due to a partial knowledge or to an attitude of wriggling out. In fact, this attitude of wriggling out had already assumed the status of a philosophy in itself in Sanjaya Belattiputta, a contemporary of the Buddha. When he was interrogated, he would respond with such a series of negations like, I do not say it is, I do not say it is thus, I do not say it is otherwise, nor do I say it is neither, etc. The attempt here is to evade the issue by a sort of eel-wriggling. That school of philosophy which resorted to such an evasive judgment came to be known as Amaravikkhippavāda. The Buddha refuses to subscribe to such practical sophistry by rejecting the fourth alternative, I neither know it nor am ignorant of it. Here then we have the same tetralemma presented in a different guise. It smacks of a riddle that the Buddha was confronted with, the riddle of coming to terms with worldly parlance. As we have already mentioned, the commentary analyzes the main theme of the discourse into 5 planes. It also records that the earth shook at 5 points of the discourse, that is, at the end of the proclamation for each plane. According to the commentary, the first plane is the plane of omniscience, Sabbanyata. The phrases representative of that plane are said to be Tamahang Jānāmi, that I know, Tamahang Abhanyāsi, that have I fully understood, and Tam Tathagatassa Viditam, that is known to the Tathagata. Then comes the plane of the influx-free one, Khināsavabhu, represented by the section ending with the phrase Na upaṭṭhāsi, does not take his stand upon it. It is so called because that phrase brings out the characteristic of not taking a stance by way of cravings, conceits and views, in the case of an influx-free one. The 3 phrases tam mamassa musa, it would be a falsehood on my part, tam passatādisami, likewise that too would be a falsehood in me, and tam mama assakali, it would be a fault in me, are interpreted by the commentary as representing the third plane of truth, Satyabhumi. We have now dealt with that too. What comes next as the fourth plane is the deepest of all. The commentary calls it the plane of the void, Sunyata. It is with good reason that it is so called. The paragraph that follows is said to represent that plane. It runs, Iti ko bhikkhave tathagato dittha datthabbang ditthaṃ namanyati aditthaṃ namanyati datthabbang namanyati dattharang namanyati sutta sotabbang sutang namanyati asutang namanyati sotabbang namanyati sotarang namanyati muta motabbang mutang namanyati amutang namanyati motabbang namanyati motarang namanyati viññātā viññātabbang viññātang namanyati aññātang namanyati viññātabbang namanyati viññātharang namanyati. Here too we are confronted with the question of variant readings. To begin with, here we have given the phrase dittha datthabbang dittam, whereas the commentary takes it as dattha datthabbang dittam. According to the commentary, dattha is a hypothetical variant of the absolutive form disva, for it paraphrases dattha datthabbanti disva datthabbang. That is, dattha datthabbang stands for disva datthabbang. So the whole sentence in question is said to convey the sense, having seen, he does not imagine a seeing worth seeing. But the variant reading dittha is granted, though the commentator prefers the reading dattha, as it is suggestive of an absolutive drushtva. Taking the cue from this commentarial preference, the Burmese Chattasangiti edition goes a step further in substituting suttva, muttva and viññatva rather arbitrarily to give an absolutive twist to the three phrases that follow as suttva sotabbang sutang, muttva motabbang mutang, and viññatva viññātabbang viññātam. Probably the editors thought that in this context the terms dittha, sutta, mutta and viññāta could not be interpreted as they are. But we may point out that in keeping with the line of interpretation we have followed so far, these three terms may be said to stand for an extremely deep dimension of this discourse, dealing with the one. The other day we simply gave a sketch of a possible rendering. The statement dittha datthabbang ditthaṃ namanyati has to be interpreted as an assertion that the Tathagata does not imagine a sight worthwhile seeing as apart from the seeing, that there is nothing substantial in the seeing. So also the other statements. Sutta sotabbang sutang namanyati does not imagine a worthwhile hearing apart from the heard. Muta motabbang mutang namanyati does not imagine a worthwhile sensing apart from the sensed. Viññātā viññātabbang viññātang namanyati does not imagine a worthwhile cognition apart from the cognized. In case our interpretation still appears problematic, we may hark back to the Bahya Sutta we have already explained at length. The philosophy behind the Buddha's exhortation to the ascetic Bahya could be summed up in the words ditthe dittha mattang bhavisati sutista mattang bhavisati muti muta mattang bhavisati viññāte viññātu mattang bhavisati. In the seen there will be just the seen, in the heard there will be just the heard, in the sense there will be just the sensed, in the cognized there will be just the cognized. What is meant is that one has to stop at just the seen, without discursively imagining that there is something seen, something substantial behind the seen. Similarly, in regard to the heard, one has to take it as just a heard, not something heard. In the case of the phrase dittha datthabbang ditthaṃ namanyati, the word dittha being in the ablative case, we may render it as does not imagine a sight worthwhile seeing as apart from the seen. By way of further clarification of this point, we may revert to the simile of the dog on the plank, which we gave in our explanation of Nāma-rūpa. The simile, of course, is not canonical but of fable origin. When a dog, while crossing a stream, stops halfway on the plank and starts wagging its tail and peeping curiously down, the reason is the sight of its own image in the water. It imagines a dog there, a water dog. The dog thinks that there is something worthwhile seeing apart from the scene. It is unaware of the fact that it is seeing what it sees because it is looking. It thinks that it is looking because there is something out there to be seen. The moment it realizes that it is seeing because it is looking, it will stop looking at its own image in the water. We have here a very subtle point in the law of dependent arising, one that is integral to the analysis of name and form. So then, due to the very ignorance of the fact that it is seeing because it is looking, the dog imagines another dog there in the water. What is called manjana is an imagining of that sort. No such imagining is there in the Tathagata. Dittha datthabbang ditthaṃ namanyati. He does not imagine a sight worth seeing as apart from the seen. In short, for him, the seen is the be-all and the end-all of it. The seen is dependent realism. It comes about due to a collocation of conditions, apart from which it has no existence per se. Every instance of looking down at the water is a fresh experience, and every time an image of the dog in the water and of another looking at is created. The dog is seeing its own image. Everything is dependent realism, passa paccaya, says the Brahmajala Sutta, dependent on context. Here there is something really deep. It is because of the personality view, sakkaya ditthi, that the world is carried away by this illusion. One goes on looking, saying that one is doing so as there is something to be seen, but the seen is there because of the looking. This then is the moral behind the statement, dittha datthappang ditthaṃ namanyati. Does not imagine a seeing worthwhile seeing as apart from the seeing itself. This is the dictum implicit in the Bahya Sutta too, which could be illustrated by the simile of the dog on the plant. The Tathagata does not imagine a sight as existing apart from the bare act of seeing. If further illustrations are needed, let us take the case of hearing music from a distance. One imagines a thing called music, and with the idea of listening to the same music, goes to the place where the music is going on. One is not aware of the fact that at each step in that direction, one is hearing a different music. Why? Because one is ignorant of the law of dependent arising. Just as in the former case, the dog seeing is dependent on the dog looking. Here too, the auditory consciousness of a music is the outcome of a dependence between ear and sound. So, deluded as he is, he goes to the music hall to listen better to the same music. He will realize the extent of his delusion if he happens to put his ear to the musical instrument. When he does so, he will hear not a music, but a set of crude vibrations. But this is what is going on in the world. The world is steeped in the delusion of imagining that it is the same music one is hearing, though at each step in that direction the music changes. This is due to the fact that it is dependent reaction. Actually, there is no person hearing, but only a state of affairs dependent on the ear and sound, a condition arising dependent on contact. In the present textual context, the terms dittha, sutta, mutta and viññāta, seen, heard, sensed and cognized, have to be understood in this light. So this is how the phrase dittha datthabbang ditthaṃ namanyati has to be interpreted. But the commentary does not seem to have appreciated the relevance of this paragraph to the Buddha's teachings on voidness. While commenting on ditthaṃ namanyati, it expatiates aham mahajanena ditthameva passamīti tanhāvāna dittī namanyati. According to it, what is meant is that the Tathagata does not imagine by way of cravings, conceits and views that he is seeing just what the common people have seen. This is an oversimplification, a rather shallow interpretation. The next phrase, aditthaṃ namanyati, is similarly explained. Aditthaṃ namanyati iti aham mahajanena aditthameya etam passāmi iti evampi tanhādi manyanāhi namanyati. He does not imagine an unseen means that the Tathagata does not imagine by way of imaginings through craving, etc., that he is seeing something unseen by the common people. The commentary, it seems, has gone at a tangent, bypassing the deeper sense. We have already explained the deeper significance of the phrase Diṭṭhaṃ na maññati, does not imagine the seeing. Now what does Adiṭṭhaṃ na maññati mean? In terms of our simile of the dog on the plank, Diṭṭhaṃ na maññati means that the Tathagata does not imagine a dog in the water. Adiṭṭhaṃ na maññati could therefore mean that the Tathagata does not imagine that the dog has not seen. Why he does not treat it as an unseen should be clear from that declaration we had already cited, ending with Tamaham najanamiti vadeyam tam mamasamusa. If I were to say that I do not know, it would be a falsehood in me. The fact of seeing is not denied, though what is seen is not taken as a dog, but only as an image of one. That is dependent realism. Since the understanding of it as a dependent realism phenomenon is there, the Tathagata does not imagine an unseen either. Adiṭṭhaṃ na maññati. The phrase Daṭṭhaṃ na maññati is also explicable in the light of the foregoing discussion. Now, the dog on the plank keeps on looking down at the water again and again because it thinks that there is something worthwhile seeing in the water. Such a delusion is not there in the Tathagata. He knows that at each turn it is a phenomenon of a seeing dependent realism, dependent on contact, possible. Every time it happens, it is a fresh sight, a new preparation, sankhara. So there is nothing to look for in it. Only a looking is there, nothing worth looking at. Only a seeing is there, nothing to be seen. Apart from the bare act of hearing, there is nothing to be heard. It is the wrong view of a self that gives a notion of substantiality. The above phrase, therefore, is suggestive of insubstantiality, essencelessness, and voidness. Music is just a word. By taking seriously the concept behind that word, one imagines a thing called music. The pandemonium created by a number of musical instruments is subsumed under the word music. Then one goes all the way to listen to it. The same state of affairs prevails in the case of the seeing. It is because the Tathagata has understood this fact that he does not imagine a thing worth seeing or hearing. The same applies to the other sensory data. Then comes the phrase Daṭṭhaṃ na maññati, does not imagine a seer. Here we have the direct expression of voidness, the voidness of a self or anything belonging to a self. Now that dog on the plank has not understood the fact that there is a mutual relationship between the looking dog and the seeing dog. It is because of the looking dog that the seeing dog is seeing. There is a conditioned relationship between the two. In other words, dependent on eye and forms arises eye consciousness. Cakkhuñca paticca rūpeca uppadyate cakkhu viññāna. The mere presence of the eye is not enough for eye consciousness to arise, but dependent on eye and forms arises eye consciousness. Though stated simply, it has a depth that is not easy to fathom. To say that it is dependent on eye and form is to admit that it is dependently arisen. The law of dependent arising is already implicated. There is therefore no seer apart from the phenomenon of seeing, according to the Tathagata. He does not imagine a seer, Daṭṭhaṃ na maññati. For the worldly, the bare act of seeing carries with it the perception of one who sees. He has a notion of a self and something belonging to a self. The same teaching is found in the Bahya Sutta. After instructing Bahya to stop at just the seen, the heard, the sensed, and the cognized, the Buddha goes on to outline the end result of that training. Yato khote bahya diṭṭhe diṭṭhamattaṃ bhavisati sute sutamattaṃ bhavisati mute mutamattaṃ bhavisati viññāte viññātamattaṃ bhavisati tato tvaṃ bahyena tena yato tvaṃ bahyena tena tato tvaṃ bahyena tattha yato tvaṃ bahyena tattha tato tvaṃ bahyena vidha na huran na ubhayamantarena esevanto dukkha. And when to you bahya, there will be in the seen just the seen, in the heard just the heard, in the sense just the sense, in the cognized just the cognized, then Bahya you are not by it. And when Bahya you are not by it, then Bahya you are not in it. And when Bahya you are not in it, then Bahya you are neither here nor there nor in between. This itself is the end of suffering. That is to say, when Bahya you have gone through that training of stopping at just the seen, the heard, the sensed and the cognized, then you would not be imagining in terms of them. The algebraic-like expressions natena and natatha have to be understood as forms of egoistic imagining, manjana. When you do not imagine in terms of them, you would not be in them. There would be no involvement in regard to them. In the case of that music, for instance, you would not be in the orchestra. The egoistic imagining implicating involvement with the music presupposes a hearer, sotara, dwelling in the orchestra. When Bahya you do not dwell in it, yatotam Bahyana tattva, then Bahya you are neither here nor there nor in between the two. Tatotam Bahya nevaita nahuram naubhamantri. This itself is the end of suffering. In other words, you would have realized whiteness, sunyata. The expressions that tarang namanyati does not imagine a seer, sotarang namanyati does not imagine a hearer, motarang namanyati does not imagine a senser, and vinyatarang namanyati does not imagine a knower, have to be understood in this light. The Tathagata does not even imagine a thinker apart from thought. This is the plane of the white sunyata, the perfect realization of the causelessness or essencelessness of the seen, the heard, the sensed, and the cognized. The very absence of manjana or egoistic imagining is to be understood by sunyata bhumi or the plane of the void. The worldling takes seriously the subject-object relationship in the grammatical structure, as it seems the simplest explanation of phenomena. Because there is something to be seen, there is someone who sees. Because there is someone who sees, there is something to be seen. There is a duality between these two. To understand the law of dependent arising is to be free from this duality. It is the ability to see a concatenation of conditions, a conglomeration of causal factors, an assemblage instead of a bifurcation. The way of the worldlings, however, is to follow the subject-object relationship, a naive acceptance of the grammatical structure, which is the easiest mode of communication of ideas. They are misled by it to take seriously such notions as one who sees and a thing seen, one who hears and a thing heard, but the Tathagata is free from that delusion. Now we come to the fifth section of the discourse, known as Tādhi-bhūmi, the plane of the Such. It runs, Iti ko bhikkhave tathāgato dittha sutta mutta viññātabbesu dhammesu tādhi eva tādhi. Tammāca panatādhi mā añño tādhi uttarītaro vā panitataro vā natthīti vadāmi. Thus once the Tathagata, being such in regard to all phenomena, seen, heard, sensed and cognized, is such. Moreover than he who is such, there is none other higher or more excellent, I declare. The most difficult word here is tādhi. We have already explained it to some extent. It can be rendered by such or thus. The commentary explains it by the phrase tādhita nama eka sadisata. Suchness means to be always alive. By way of illustration, the commentary states Tathagato cha yadiso labhadisu tādisova alabhadisu. As he is in regard to gain, etc., so is the Tathagata in regard to loss, etc. The allusion here is to the 8 worldly vicissitudes: gain, loss, fame, ill fame, praise, blame, and pleasure, pain. But this explanation is rather misleading, as it ignores a certain deep dimension of the meaning of the term tādhi. When it is said, as he is in regard to gain, so is he in regard to loss, one can ask, how is he in regard to gain? This is imprecise as a meaning. However, the commentator happens to quote from the Mahaniddesa another explanation, which is more to the point. It is briefly stated as Ittadi Tetadi, such in regard to the desirable and the undesirable, and explained as Labhe Pitadi, Alabhe Pitadi, Yase Pitadi, Ayase Pitadi, Nindaya Pitadi, Pasansaya Pitadi, Sukhe Pitadi, Dukhe Pitadi. He is such in gain as well as in loss. He is such in fame as well as in ill fame, etc. That is the correct explanation. Instead of saying as he is in gain, so is he in loss, we have here continuous suchness in regard to all vicissitudes. He is such in gain as well as in loss. He is such in fame as well as in ill fame. He is such in praise as well as in blame. He is such in pleasure as well as in pain. The reason for this suchness we have explained on an earlier occasion. In one sense, the term Tadi stands for the understanding of the norm called Tatata. The other implication is the abstinence from the tendency towards identification or acquisition meant by Tammyata. This exemplary trait is called Atammyata. This is an extremely important term occurring in the discourses, which, however, has fallen into neglect at present. In the case of music, for instance, Tammyata would imply an attachment to it that amounts to an identification with it. Tammayo means made of that, as in Suvannamaya, made of gold, and Rajatamaya, made of silver. To be free from this Tammyata is to be Tadi, such, that is to say, not to be of that stuff, Tammyata. The attitude of not leaning on or grasping is meant by it. The quality of being Tadi or such is often rendered by firmness, steadfastness, and immovability. Generally, one associates firmness, immovability, or stability with holding on or leaning on. But here we have just the contrary. Not to hold on to anything is to be such. This suchness has a flexibility of a higher order or an adaptability. The adaptability characteristic of the sage who lives on Pindapata or alms food is highlighted in the following verse. Alatthaṃ yadidaṃ sadhu nālatthaṃ kusalamiti ubhayeneva sotadi rukkhaṃ upanivante. Suppose I got it, well and good. Suppose I didn't get, that's fine too. In both circumstances, he is such and comes back like one who walks up to a tree. This kind of adaptability and resilience is also implied by the term Tadi. Though the term is sometimes rendered by the word steadfast, it does not stand for any rigidity. Instead, it carries implications of a non-rigid resilience. This is a wonderful quality in the Tathagatas and Aham. We may compare it to a revolving swing in a children's playground. One who is seated in a revolving swing has nothing to get upset about falling headlong when the swing goes up. The seats are hung in such a way that they also turn with the revolving motion of the swing. Had they been rigidly fixed, one seated there would fall off the seat when it goes up. It is that kind of resilience that is characteristic of the quality of Tadita or suchness. This is how we have to understand the famous lines in the Mahamangala Sutta. Puttasa lokadhamme chittaṃ yasana kampati, whose mind remains unshaken when touched by worldly vicissitudes. This quality of being unshaken, this immovability, is the result of not grasping. It comes when there is no tenacious clinging. It is to one who rests on or leans on something that there is dislodgement or instability. Now I am leaning on the wall. If someone does damage to the wall, I would get shaken. That is what is suggested by the axiom Nisitasa Charitam. Anisitasa Charitam Nati. To one who is attached, there is dislodgement. To the one detached, there is no dislodgement. The worldling, on the other hand, thinks that to lean on or to rely on something is the mark of stability. So it seems that the term Tadi has an extraordinary dimension of meaning. In this particular context, however, the suchness spoken of does not concern the 8 worldly vicissitudes like gain and loss. Here it carries a special nuance, as is evident from the statement, Iti ko bhikkave tathagato ditta sutta mutta viññātabbesu dhammesu thādi eva thādi. Thus amongst the Tathagata, being such in regard to all phenomena seen, heard, sensed and cognized, is such. The suchness here meant is about the views adhered to by the worldlings. In regard to things seen, heard, sensed and cognized, the worldlings go on asserting dogmatically, idameva satyam mogamaya. This alone is true, all else is false. But the Tathagata has no such dogmatic involvement. He only analytically exposes them for what they are. As we try to illustrate by the simile of the dog on the plank, the Tathagata simply penetrates into their dependently arisen nature and declares that all those views are dependent on contact, passapaccaya. That is the Thādi quality meant here. If we are to understand the plane of suchness, Thādi Bhumi, in a deeper sense, this is how we have to appreciate its significance. Now we come to the couplet, forming the grand final to the Kaṭukurunde Sutta. Yang kinti ditthaṃ vasutaṃ mutaṃ vājjositaṃ saccamutaṃ paresam datesu tādi sayasaṃ mutesu saccam musāvāpi paraṃ daheyaṃ. Etaṃ ca sallaṃ patigacca disvā ajjositā yatta pajāvisattā jānāmi passāmi tatheva etaṃ ajjositaṃ nati tathāgataṃ. In the first verse, we have the difficult term sayasaṃ mutesu, which we rendered by amidst those who are entrenched in their own views. The term carries insinuations of philosophical inbreeding, which often accounts for dogmatic adherence to views. The Tathagata declares that he does not hold as true or false any of the concepts of individual truths, based on what is seen, heard, sensed and cognized by others, because of his suchness. Being such, he does not categorically label any of those views as true or false. He penetrates into and analyzes the psychological background of all those dogmatic views and understands them as such. In the final verse, he declares that he has seen well in advance the barb on which mankind is hooked, impaled. The barb is none other than the dogmatic assertion, I know, I see, it is verily so. Having seen this barb well in advance, the Tathagata entertains no dogmatic involvement of that sort. The precise meaning of some words and phrases here is a matter of controversy. A discussion of them might throw more light on their deeper nuances. The most difficult term seems to be sayasaṃ. The commentary gives the following explanation. Sayasaṃ suti Sayameva samvaritva piyayitva gahita gahanesu dittigatikesuti attho. Dittigatikahi sayam samutati muccanti. Sayasaṃ means among those dogmatic view holders who have grasped those views, having recollected them and cherished them. Dogmatic view holders are called sayasaṃ. According to the commentary, the term sayasaṃ refers to persons who hold dogmatic views, but we interpreted it as a reference to such views themselves. By way of clarification, we may allude to some discourses in the Attaka of the Sutta Nibbāna, which bring up a wealth of material to substantiate the salient points in the Kaṭukurunde Sutta, while throwing more light on the particular term in question. The chapter called Attaka in the Sutta Nibbāna in particular embodies a deep analysis of the controversies among contemporary dogmatists. Let us first of all take up for comment some verses that throw more light on the meaning of the term sayasaṃ from the Chula Vyuha Sutta. That discourse unfolds itself in the form of question and answer. The commentary explains that this medium of dialogue was adopted by the Buddha to resolve the clash of philosophical moot points current in the society, and that the interlocutor is a replica of the Buddha himself, created by his psychic power. Be that as it may, the relevant question for the present context is presented as follows. Kasmānu saccāni vadanti nāna pavādiyāse kusala vadāna saccāni sutāni bahūni nāna udāhute takkam manussharanti. Why do they proclaim various truths, claiming to be experts each in his field? Are there several and various truths, or do they merely follow logical inconsistency? The Buddha's reply to it is as follows. Naheva saccāni bahūni nāna aññatra saññāya niccāni loke takkanca ditthisu pakappayitva saccam musāti dveta mama. There are no several and various truths that are permanent in the world apart from perception. It is by manipulating logic in speculative views that they speak of two things called truth and falsehood. There is no plurality in the concept of truth apart from the perception based on which they declare various speculative views. It seems that the Buddha grants the possibility of various levels of perception as a truth for all times, though he does not accept a plurality of truths arising out of a variety of speculative views based on them. He understands the psychology of logic. Having seen penetratively the perceptual background of each and every view, he accepts as a psychological fact that such and such a perception could precipitate such and such a view. Therefore, in a limited or relative sense, they are true. The dichotomy between truth and falsehood has arisen in the world due to a manipulation of logic on individual viewpoints. This fact comes up for further comment in the Mahavyuha Sutta that follows. Sakanhi dhammang paripunnamahu vanyasa dhammang panahinamahu evampi viggaya vivadiyanti sakan sammutimahu satcham. This verse describes how debating parties go on clashing with each other. They call their own system of thought perfect and the other system of thought inferior. Thus they quarrel and dispute. Their own individual viewpoint they assert as true. The phrase sakang sammutim, each his own viewpoint, is somewhat suggestive of sayasammutesu, the problematic term in the Kaṭukurunde Sutta. Yet another verse from the Pasura Sutta in the Atthakavagga exposes the biases and prejudices underlying these individual truths. Idheva suddhi iti vādiyanti nāññesu dhammesu visuddhimā. Yannisita tatta subham vadana pacceka satchesu puthuni vittha. Here in this system is purity, they assert polemically. They are not prepared to grant purity in other systems of thought. Whatever view they lean on, that they speak in praise of. They are severally entrenched in their own individual truths. The last line is particularly relevant as it brings up the concept of pacceka satcha. To be a pacceka Buddha means to be enlightened for oneself. So the term pacceka satcha can mean truth for oneself. Those who hold conflicting views go on debating, entrenched each in his own concept of truth. The three expressions, pacceka satcha, sakang sammutim, and sayasammutesu, convey more or less the same idea. The words tesu sayasammutesu refer to those narrow viewpoints to which they are individually confined or remain closeted in. The Tathagata does not hold as true or false any of those views limited by the self-bias. Another lapse in the commentary to the Kaṭukurunde Sutta is its comment on the phrase parang daheya. It takes the word parang in the sense of supreme, uttamam prattva, whereas in this context it means the other. Here too we may count on the following two lines of the Chulavyuha Sutta of the Sutta Nibbāna in support of our interpretation. Yeneva bādoti parang dahati tena tumanang kusaloti chaha. That by which one dubs the other fool, by that itself one calls oneself an expert. From this it is clear that the phrase parang dahati means dubs another. The last two lines of the Kaṭukurunde Sutta are of utmost importance. Gānāmi passāmi tatheva etam ajjositam nati tathāgatana. I know, I see, it is verily so, no such clinging for the Tathagatas. Worldlings dogmatically grasp the data heaped up by their six sense bases, but the Tathagatas have no such entanglements in regard to sensory knowledge. Why so? It is because they have seen the cessation of the six sense bases. By way of illustration, We may compare the seeing of the cessation of the six sense bases to an exposure of the inner mechanism of a high-speed engine by removing the bonnet. In the Dvaya Sutta, from which we quoted in our last sermon, the Buddha showed us the functioning of the gigantic machine called the sixfold sense base, its vibrations, revolutions, beats, and running gears. The discourse analyzes the mechanism in such words as Chakku anicchang viparinami anyatha bhavi, rupa anicca viparinamino anyatha bhavino, itte tangvayam chalancheva payancha anicchang viparinami anyatha bhavi. I is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Forms are impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. Thus this diet is unstable, evanescent, impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The discourse proceeds in this vein and concludes with the words Phuttho bhikkhave vedeti, Phuttho ceteti, Phuttho sanjanati, ittetepi dhamma chala cheva vaya cha anicca viparinamino anyatha bhavino. Contacted monks one feels, contacted one intends, contacted one perceives. Thus these things too are stable, evanescent, impermanent, changing and becoming otherwise. The concluding reference is to the products of the six sense bases. Feelings, intentions and perceptions arising due to contact are also unstable, evanescent, impermanent, changing and becoming otherwise. The sum total of percepts is indicated by the words Dittha, Sutta, Mutta and Viññāna. The totality of percepts are made up or prepared, sankhata. The term sankhata has nuances suggestive of production. If you take the sixfold sense base as a high-speed machine productive of perceptions, the Buddha has revealed to us the workings of its intricate machinery. Each and every part of this machine is unstable, evanescent, impermanent, changing and becoming otherwise. The Buddha understood the made-up or prepared nature, sankhata, of all these, as well as the preparation, sankhara, that go into it. That is why the Buddha has no dogmatic involvement in regard to the products of this machine, the totality of all what is seen, heard, sensed and cognized, Dittha, Sutta, Mutta, Viññāna. None of them is substantial. They are essenceless and insubstantial. There is nothing worthwhile grasping here as apart from the activities or preparations that are dynamic in themselves. So far we have tried to understand the state of affairs with reference to this discourse. But now let us take up a canonical simile that facilitates our understanding. The Buddha has compared consciousness to a magic show in the Pena Pindupama Sutta of the Kanta Samyutta we had already cited. Pena Pindupamang Rupam Vedana Bubulupama Marichikupama Sanya Sankhara Kadalupama Mayupamancha Viññānam Vipitadicha Bandhana. Form is like a mass of foam and feeling but an airy bubble. Perception is like a mirage, and formations a banana trunk. Consciousness is a magic show, a juggler's trick entirely. All these similes were made known by the kinsman of the sun. As a matter of fact, the verse itself is a mnemonic summary of a certain sermon delivered by the Buddha. According to it, the Buddha, the kinsman of the sun, has compared form to a mass of foam, feeling to a water bubble, perception to a mirage, preparations to a banana trunk, and consciousness to a magic show. What is of relevance to us here is the comparison of consciousness to a magic show. The simile of the magic show is presented in that sutta in the following verse. Sayatapi bhikkave mayakaro va mayakaranti va siva chatum mahabate mayang vidanseya tamenang chakuma puriso passeya nijjhāyeya yoniso parikheya tasatang passato nijjhāyato yoniso parikhato kritakanyeva khāyeya tucchakanyeva khāyeya asarakanyeva khāyeya kiññi siya bhikkave mayāya sāro एवमेव को भिक्खवे यंकिंच विज्ञानं अतीतानागत पच्चुप्पन्नं अज्जत्तं वा बहिद्धा वा उदारिकं वा सुखमं वा येनं वा पणितं वा यं दूरे सन्तिके वा तं भिक्खु पश्यति निध्यायति योनिसो उपपरिक्खति तस्सतं पश्यतो निध्यायतो योनिसो उपपरिक्खतो कृत्तकन्येव खायति तुच्छकन्येव खायति आसारकन्येव खायति किञ्जिसया भिक्खवे विज्ञाने सारो. Suppose monks, the magician or magician's apprentice, should hold a magic show at the four crossroads, and a keen-sighted man should see it, ponder over it, and reflect on it radically. Even as he sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically, he would find it empty, he would find it hollow, he would find it void of essence. What essence, monks, could there be in the magic show? Even so, monks, whatever consciousness, be it past, future, or present, in oneself or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a monk sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically. And even as he sees it, ponders over it, and reflects on it radically, he finds it empty, he finds it hollow, he finds it void of essence. What essence, monks, could there be in a consciousness,